More evidence this morning of our falling property market with the latest auction clearance rates for this weekend just in. And here to take us through them is property expert Dr. Andrew Wilson. Andrew, thanks for being on our show. So last weekend, what was it, around 45% or so with the clearance rates?
It was, yes.
So what was it this weekend?
Well, just a little bit above 50% in Melbourne and Sydney, below 40% in Brisbane, and just around 60% in Adelaide and Canberra. Of course, the markets were back this weekend after the long weekends last weekend. So auction numbers were higher, but not a lot of joy there for most sellers. These numbers are the lowest we've seen really since the end of 2011.
Well, yeah, well, just looking at that graph that was just on the screen there, it's dipped quite considerably in 12 months or so. How much in New South Wales, or Sydney anyway, could that be put down to the weather?
Well, not a lot really.
No.
I think it's all about, the end of a massive boom both in Melbourne and Sydney. Buyers and sellers are quite wary at the moment. There's a lot of talk, of course, about where prices are going. And I think buyers and sellers will largely sit on their hands for the remainder of the spring selling season. And, we do have some questions about how effective auctions are now in the marketplace where there are fewer buyers and less competition.
So is this a good thing for sellers? I mean, could they now just ditch the auction completely and then go with a private sale? Is that what you would recommend?
Well, I think that we'll see more private sale auctions or more private sales happening rather than auctions. Of course, we've seen the proportion in Sydney particularly increase from around 15% of all sales to around 25% over the last 4 years. I think that'll track backwards. Melbourne always has a strong culture for auction activity, but I think the proportion there will also track backwards. And of course, it's not good to do a 6-week auction campaign and then nobody turns up.
That's right.
So,
well, it's expensive, isn't it?
It is that, and it's also, it also jangles the nerves a little as well.
So are there some bargains out there to be had now?
Well, look, if you are a buyer, obviously you can squeeze at the moment. It's a good time to be a buyer, but most buyers are sellers and sellers are buyers. You've got to sell your property in the first instance. But I think we're going to have a quite fragile market for perhaps the next 12 months.
It's 12 months?
Yeah, well, look, we've got obviously this wariness from buyers and sellers. They'll sit out until things become a little bit more apparent. Look, the underlying drivers are positive. The economy's strong. Interest rates aren't going anywhere. But of course, we've got elections next year, and issues such as negative gearing may mean buyers and sellers will still remain a little wary of the marketplace. But I don't think prices are going to collapse at all. It's just going to be a very flat and subdued market environment.
Does this surprise you at all?
No, look, it doesn't. Once the interest rate driver was taken out of the equation, of course, we were going to get a much flatter market going forward. We've had such a great result, really, for sellers over the last 5 years in Melbourne and Sydney, and the other markets have also recorded strong prices growth or reasonable prices growth. So the party's over. It's now about just finding your own dream home and finding a buyer for your own property, and we all move on. But there is this transition period over the next 12 months where we're going to have quite flat market conditions, and certainly prices won't be rising at anywhere near the levels we've seen in recent years, maybe forever.
Well, which is usual with these things, it dips for a couple of years. What's the cycle? Every 7 years or so, and then it'll start to sort of increase again.
Well, it's all about where interest rates go, and this is the change we have now, is we've had interest rates on hold now for a record 2 years plus, likely to be on hold for maybe another 2 years, but and that means the driving force for house prices isn't there. That roller coaster ride is finished, so it's a whole new ball game now. And buyers and sellers have to get reconditioned to this new market.
Get out there and bag a bargain, folks.
Well, maybe.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Ali.
Australia